regardless of whether you are starting a business from scratch, purchasing a business, or becoming a franchisee, there are certain ways that you're going to come up with the money to fund that process. And I want to start with going through some of those options in terms of prioritization, flexibility, and preference. When it comes to this process, liquidity is king. And there's all these connective threads to things we've talked about on the podcast in the past. And one of the things I'm a fan of is having non-qualified investments. In other words, non-retirement assets that you can access or use for leverage, like what we talked about with a securities-backed line of credit, where you're literally using the equity in your investment account to establish a line of credit in the same way that you would have a home equity line of credit. So when it comes to coming up with the money to fund these type of ventures, your non-qualified investments are going to be the first line of defense. Now, a less preferable funding source that I do see people use all the time would be a home equity line of credit, where similar to the securities-backed line of credit, you use the equity in your investment account. A HELOC is tapping into the equity that you have in your home when you look at the value of that home as compared to your mortgage balance. The reason I'm not as big a fan when it comes to a home equity line of credit is, unlike a securities-backed line of credit, where there is no set repayment period as long as you have a certain amount in your investment account, with a home equity line of credit, you typically do have to pay back those funds in a certain period of time. 5 years, 10 years. Some HELOCs will allow you to go out as far as 20 years. But to me, you want to make sure, especially if you are getting a business loan on top of accessing a home equity line of credit, that you understand, if I take $50,000 off of this home equity line of credit, I may only be required to make interest-only payments. But at the end of this repayment period, I either have to hope that they will extend my line of credit, refinance the amount that I owe into my actual mortgage, which could put you in a position where you're getting less favorable terms than you have on your current loan, or you have to make a lump sum payment that you may not be in a position to make at the end of that repayment period. And lastly, retirement accounts. And this is an area where, to me, there's one option that is really appealing, and there's one awful option that I'm not a fan of at all. And the option that is not appealing at all is taking a withdrawal or a loan against your 401k. You have to understand the consequences of each of them. In most cases, your 401k or your employer retirement plan is not accessible without penalty until 59 and a half. In some cases, 55. And if you do this before 59 and a half or 55 in some cases, in addition to those income taxes, you're also going to owe a 10% penalty right off the top for accessing it before you were eligible to do so. Now, some people will instead use a 401k loan, and I'm not actually one of those who thinks that you should never take a loan from your 401k. The problem, however, with doing a 401k loan and then leaving to start a business is you can't repay the loan once you separated from service. You have a certain period of time after you've left where you either have to pay that amount back to your plan as a lump sum payment, or they're going to automatically assess the 10% penalty and taxes because they're going to assume that you're keeping the money and it's an early withdrawal. The second option, however, which is a newer option, at least in terms of my knowledge of it, is what's called a rollover as a business startup. This is a really unique concept where, instead of doing a 401k loan or withdrawal, you're instead using a mechanism set up by the IRS to allow you to fund a small business. The concept of a rollover of a business startup is you take your 401k at your current employer or previous employer if you've already left. You start a C corporation, which is a type of business structure for the business that you are intending to fund. And once you started that C corporation, you establish a 401k for the C corporation. You then roll over the 401k from your previous employer into the 401k of your newly established C Corp, and then you liquidate the proceeds of that 401k rollover and you use it to buy shares of the C Corp and fund your business. Now, that's a very complex multi-step process that has to be done in a particular way to make sure that you're avoiding taxation and penalties, but it does allow an option for people out there who may have very well-funded 401ks, where if they're saying, hey, I have $300,000 in my 401k, but I need $75,000 to start my business, I can take a portion, I'm not liquidating all of my assets, and complete a rollover as a business startup and fund this business opportunity that allows me to potentially establish an asset without sacrificing or leveraging all of my retirement funds.